This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/get started. That's GREENLIGHT.com/get started.
And so I say, why would you bring up that your husband is dead if you don't want me to ask how he died?
I mean, I think she was explaining that you were just at the wrong funeral.
Well,
so
right, but there wasn't a right funeral. I was just going there for the free food.
Not better, man. You see how that's not better, right?
I do not see how that's not
you
better.
Should. Maybe.
Pretty obvious.
Surprise!
Surprise what, man? What's with the sheet?
Okay, so you guys know how Noah's essay this week is about Frederick Douglass, fearless abolitionist, and, more importantly, guy who beat the shit out of his slave owner?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, what about him?
So I figure what better way to start the episode than by doling out a little justice of our own? Ta-da!
Eli, who are these people?
Oh, okay, it's been a while. I get it. These are your bullies. So on the end here, this is Ricky Dillon. Noah, you told me you used to take your lunch money every day before school. This is Carl Lenahan Cecil, right? You told me how much he bullied you in high school.
Hi, Carl. How's it going?
And
Doing
look,
good,
look,
buddy?
Tom, this one was tough, but I found him. I got that kid who pushed you off the swings in kindergarten.
Phil Rolstrid? Man, how you doing? It's been forever. Phil.
Okay, guys, no.
Phil.
You're not supposed to catch up with these people.
It's Phil.
You're supposed to beat them up
No,
like Frederick
what?
Douglass would have wanted.
What? Eli, Frederick Douglass is a hero, not because the ass he kicked, but because of the good he did. The point of his legacy isn't petty vengeance. It's justice, dude.
It is?
Yeah.
I mean, you can read the essay the day before the show, before we get to the studio.
Yeah.
You know that, right? It's they're like a week.
Beans. Well, fine. I guess I'll send them all home then.
All who home?
Oh, yeah, I didn't explain that part. In the other room, I have everyone that I bullied in high school ready to kick my ass as like the, finale.
Frederick Douglass actually did beat up a lot of guys.
Yeah.
Several
It
different
would
people
be
in
a
his
shame
life.
after everyone came all this way if we just let him go.
Yeah, and I would also like to watch you get punched just right in the face. Just
right in the face.
real
All
hard,
right.
too. Just,
Hooray.
yes.
Okay. Everyone, we are good to go. Now, let me start by saying I think we can all agree that a lot of you deserved it for being weird.
I'm going to go help.
Yeah, bring them a studio chair if you can, Noah.
Ooh, good
Helen,
call.
I did not say go yet. Rude.
Hello and welcome to Citation Needed, the podcast where we choose a subject, read a single article about it on Wikipedia, and pretend we're experts because it's the internet. And that's how it works now. I'm your critical race theory group facilitator, and I'll be hosting this sensitivity training, but I'll need my participants. First up, a guy who thinks critically about race for every D&D character he rolls, and a guy who probably is going to ask what D&D is, Eli and Tom.
Okay, tieflings are red or skin colored. Read the goddamn player's manual, you liberal cucks.
Skin
Hey,
color?
I know what D&D is, Cecil. It is a story game about elves played by people without retirement accounts.
Well, other people also play.
That's fair. That is fair.
Also joining us tonight, a man who's studied critical race theory since he beat Gen 1 pole position, Noah.
That's a pretty good analogy, actually. I would Gen 2, but in pole position, turning left is safer than turning right. Everybody's out to get you, and you have to keep proving yourself every 45 fucking seconds. So
that makes sense.
Nailed it.
This episode is going to be a very terrible tale of people forced to work for no monetary gain. If you would like to stamp out that idea right out of existence, you can become a patron of this show.
And an abolitionist. Yeah.
And I may edit that out later. We'll see.
I love it.
I may just edit that. I don't know. Looked better on paper when I wrote it, guys. It looked a lot better on paper.
I think it's funny.
If you'd
You
like
and me,
to learn
Cecil.
how to
I take my
join
jacket off. It's hot in
the
here.
ranks of the patrons, be sure to stick around till the end of the show. And with that out of the way, tell us, Noah, what person, place, thing, concept, phenomenon, or event will we be talking about today?
Frederick Douglass, sir.
And Noah, you probably read the article on Wikipedia, listened to and read like 7 books on the topic. Are you ready to abridge this so it fits in 30 minutes?
I don't know about 30. I'll see what I can do.
Okay, all right.
While we're on the subject, by the way, if you want to learn more, I highly recommend the first 3 quarters of David Blight's biography of Douglass. And if you really want to know what kind of arguments he had with his kids when they were in their 40s, the other quarter of it is pretty good, too.
All right, Noah, why Frederick Douglass?
Well, obviously, because he's an example of somebody who's doing an amazing job and is being recognized more and more, Susan.
Oh, one of the perks of running into the script first is you get to make that joke
Right?
first.
Yeah, exactly. But for realsies, though, history doesn't offer up many real heroes, especially not American history. It's like every time you try to admire a historical figure, you read what he had to say about Jews, and that fucks it up for you. But Frederick Douglass is one of the few figures in American history you can unabashedly admire. Now, I'm not saying he's without fault. He cheated on his wife to the point of having a live-in mistress twice.
Okay, and I think at that point that's just another wife. If they live
Pretty
there,
much.
that's just another wife.
Yep. And one of his chief arguments for giving black people the vote was, come on, you even let the Irish have that shit. So,
As an Irishman, I would be offended, but then I look at my family and I'm like, you know what? Maybe this isn't the group that should be deciding stuff. Like, we shouldn't. I don't know.
Fair.
Only should be asking us.
But judged against the standard of his time, Frederick Douglass is one of the most progressive, brilliant, effective, and just generally badass reformers this country has ever produced.
Okay, all right. So who was Frederick Douglass?
He was an orator and a social reformer who escaped from slavery and became one of the most important abolitionists in American history. He was also a prolific autobiographer, which, like, by itself seems like a weird thing to say about somebody.
It does. Yeah.
Right? But the dude wrote 3 autobiographies and basically spent the last 15 years of his life tweaking the last one. Along the way, he dined with presidents, broke hundreds of color barriers, and was the vice presidential candidate for the first woman to ever run for president.
Okay. And there it is. The only thing Tim Kaine and Frederick Douglass have in common.
Yeah.
Tim Kaine ran with Hillary in 2016, podcast listener. It's okay. I didn't remember his name. Right. I also had to Google it. No judgment here. Safe space.
While I was voting for him, I was forgetting his name. Yeah. So now, normally starting a biographical essay with the person's birthday is just kind of a convenient way to start the story and also give you a time frame all at once. But in this instance, it actually tells you a lot about the person. Because the best we can do for Frederick Douglass's birthday is a circa. He was probably born around February 14th of 1817, but we're not even 100% on the year. Douglass himself celebrated his birthday on the 14th, but he would spend a great deal of his time dedicated to the futile effort of pinning down that exact date. No accurate records were kept, of course, because Frederick Douglass was born a slave. And the name he started his life with was Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey. So now Frederick didn't really know his mother, Harriet Bailey. He was effectively separated from her as soon as that was physically possible, which was kind of the standard operating procedure at the time. His mom did make some effort to be part of his life by walking to the quarters he lived in after her work was done. And though his remembrances conflict a bit from one autobiography to the other, at one point he said he had never seen his mom in the daylight. Now, if you think that part's fucked up and hard to write humorous interjections into, wait till you hear about his father.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, that's why the silence, Noah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no apologies for that. So, and it gets even worse. What we know for sure about his dad is that he was a white rapist. Probably his master, Aaron
So a founding
Anthony.
father, then.
Yeah, right, yeah. No, the white rapist in question, it was probably Harriet Bailey's master, Aaron Anthony, though that's never been confirmed.
Yeah, which was too bad because Maury Povich was alive at the time.
Yeah,
Early 40s, spry young guy.
Now, the early part of his life takes place on the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay in Talbot County, Maryland. For the first few years of his life, he was more or less raised by his maternal grandmother, Betsy Bailey. And even at a young age, Frederick was noticing an advantage that was going to serve him the rest of his life. He was really smart. Like, he was super fucking smart. Like, so much so that even without the barest scrap of education, it was really obvious at the time that he was more intelligent than any of the other kids, even the educated white kids that were older than him. So when he was put to work at the brutal fucking age of 6, it was as a playmate to some of the white kids that needed smartening up. Like I guess they figured his intelligence would rub off on their dumbass progeny.
Okay, so now as a parent, this is why I make my kids play with the rich kids. I'm hoping that'll rub off.
Right.
Oh, and also, their parents always buy lunch. It's great. You
right,
can get
yeah,
a nice-
exactly. It's just as long as you
it's
alligator
nice.
arm that check
True.
correctly, yeah. So a few years later, the guy who was probably Frederick Douglass's biological dad died. Little Freddie was shuffled around a bit and eventually loaned out to a guy named Hugh Auld for basically the same smarten up your dumb kid purpose.
Okay, wait, how did they think learning happened? No, did they think it was through osmosis? So just put
Well, they hadn't experienced it themselves, clearly. So, it was anybody's guess. But
They had nothing to build on.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but the Aulds lived in Baltimore. So instead of continuing his life on a plantation, little Freddie wound up in basically the closest thing the South of the 1820s had to a cosmopolitan city. Douglass said that compared to the plantations anyway, slaves in the city were almost free men. What's more, Hugh's wife Sophia saw to it that he was properly fed and clothed and gave him a comfortable bed to sleep in, which he'd never had at any point in his life to that time. And unless I make her sound saintly in my description, Douglass was quick to point out that she did little more than to treat him, quote, as she supposed one human being ought to treat another, end quote. And yet, by the standard of her time, the bare minimum of morality makes her kind of leap off the pages of history.
Yeah, somehow you already know she's going to be played by Sandra Bullock in the movie.
Right,
Like,
yeah,
I
exactly.
really know
Exactly.
how I know that. She's just there.
But in addition to feeding the dude and not generally treating him like livestock, which, again, to be clear, was his experience to that point in his life, she also taught him to read. Or at least she got as far as she could before her husband found out she was doing that. And then, like the dumbass that he was, he gave her this big lecture about how, well, if he learned to read, he'd figure out how to break out of slavery and escape. But, like, he was there. He was standing in front of them and spoke English and had ears. So, yeah, Sophia had to stop teaching him, but he already knew the alphabet, and he had it on pretty good authority that getting good at reading would break him out of fucking bondage. So from that point on, whenever he saw a discarded piece of paper, whether it was a political pamphlet, a newspaper, or an advertising flyer, as long as it had words written on it, he would squirrel it away for practice.
And then he took that stack of paper and used it as a step to climb out his window.
Yeah, we can't have him learn to read. What if he reads about how he doesn't like being a slave, huh?
Yeah.
That'd be the only way he'd figure it out.
All right. So, of course, once he was cut off from learning new shit, it kind of deflated the purpose of having him there to smarten up the kids. So soon after that, he was hired out to a plantation owner named William Freeland, whereupon he immediately started teaching other slaves how to read. And his lessons eventually got so popular that slaves started showing up from other plantations to learn from him after hours, upwards of 40 and 50 at a time.
So they wanted him to be smart, just not smart enough for first grade? Was he teaching the white kids to be witty? I don't understand what they were trying to do. Like,
All right, you got to master the zinger. You got to get the zinger out here on the plantation. That's what's important.
Basically, yeah. So now Fred managed to keep all this shit under wraps for 6 months because of a combination of him being really smart and the white supremacists that were running the plantations never considering for a second that a slave might actually be smarter than them. But eventually word got out about his after-hours lessons and all hell broke loose. Now, to his credit, and I'm talking about a guy who owned a plantation in the antebellum South, so that's very little credit. Freeland seemed to be okay with the idea of Fred teaching slaves to read, but several other slave owners nearby were outraged at the idea, so they broke up the lessons violently.
We heard G.I. Joe. Knowledge is power. Everyone go help him out.
We don't need you to have half the battle already won. Damn. So throughout this whole time, Frederick was effectively Hugh Auld's slave. Like, he worked on Freeland's plantation, but at the end of the day, Freeland paid his wages to Hugh. Frederick had been with that family since he was a kid, but he still technically belonged on paper to Hugh's brother, Thomas Auld. And when Thomas found out that his slave was reading and knowing facts and shit, he hit the roof. So in 1833, when Douglass was about 16 years old, Thomas took him from Hugh and sent him to work for a guy named Edward Covey. Now, Covey apparently had a reputation as a slave breaker. So I guess the idea was that he was going to beat all the education out of old Fred Bailey.
Oh, so he's going to teach him to play high school football.
What?
Makes sense.
If only they'd known about that at the time. Right?
Sandra Bullock, she's in the movie. She's going to teach him out. She's going to teach him. She's going to teach him through metaphor. You see that? That's your family. You want to protect your family, boy.
Now, to this point, I've been sparse on the brutality details because, let's face it, it's already pretty fucked up that I'm asking these guys to write jokes into such a terrible story. But suffice to say that as bad as being a slave in the American South was on the average, this was worse. Douglass was whipped frequently and mercilessly, but eventually he reached the limit of what he could take, and instead of breaking, he rebelled. He fought back, and he whipped Edward Covey's ass. Now, he was only 16, but he'd been working in fields for several years at that point. He was tall for his age. He was a big dude.
Right. And so I think this we actually can take a moment on. Maybe a video reenactment, see if we can get Donnie Yen interested, lighten the mood.
There you go. Now, after the fight, Douglass ran off into the woods. At first, he went to Thomas Alden, begged to go back to the Freeland plantation, but once it was clear that wasn't going to work, he headed back to Covey's place. But he waited in the woods an extra couple of days so that he would be coming back on a Sunday when the devoutly Christian Covey was less likely to inflict a violent retribution. And the plan worked. In fact, not only did Covey not whip Douglass over the fight, but apparently he never laid a hand or lash on him again. The assumption is that, like, A, he didn't want to get his ass kicked again because getting your ass kicked hurts, and B, he didn't want too many people to find out that he got his ass kicked by a teenager lest he lose his reputation as a slave breaker.
Oh, yeah. White supremacists that wanted to look tougher than they actually were. There is an anomaly there.
Right? Yeah.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and call this one a draw.
Right.
Now, if
yeah.
you can hand me my teeth, I think there's still some in your knuckles there. That would be great. Just pry them out
What you got
for me.
right next to you. Now, a few years later, Frederick would meet and fall in love with a woman named Anna Murray. She was a free black woman about 5 years his senior that lived in Baltimore. Now, by then, he'd already gotten mixed up in one thwarted escape attempt, but he managed to talk himself out of any real punishment by, again, being smarter than all the people questioning him about it. But between that and the insolent reading and teaching, he'd earned a reputation amongst the local slave owners as a troublemaker. So both he and Anna knew there was a target on his back. So on September 3rd of 1838, with Anna's help, he made one last attempt to flee. And given his reputation to that point, it was clear that, successful or not, this was going to be his last try.
Well, I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm going to put my money on the guy who taught himself how to read from emptying the recycling bin and not the 75 IQ racist who learned history from statues. But let's take a break, come back, see how we did.
All right, Frederick. Now, what's this I hear about you teaching fellow African Americans to read?
Well, hold on. Why would I sound like a Midwestern white guy? Also, why would he be referring to his slaves as African Americans? Okay, never mind. I've been informed by my editor that that's the only way this sketch is going to fly. So, sorry. Yeah, no, I didn't teach anybody how to read.
You didn't? Well, then why did Mrs. Whitcomb say she saw y'all with books last night after supper?
Oh, is that what those were? I thought this is the strangest amount of toilet paper I have ever seen. Books, of course. I see you guys with them all the time.
Okay, well, what about Mr. Featherberry who says you've been writing letters?
Oh, no, I was trying to draw a picture of some fences that I saw.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, take this shopping list into town and pick up the groceries for me. Do you mind?
Sure, yeah, no problem.
Aha, now I caught you.
You did?
Yeah. So you forgot to ask for money. There's no way you're smart enough to read.
No, of course not. You got me.
I sure did. Art.
We left off, Frederick Douglass was penning his resignation letter when some rich white slave owner looked over his shoulder and asked what those squiggles were. What happened next, Noah?
Yeah. So when we think about slaves escaping to the North, I think most of us probably envision people sneaking through forests and following the stars, hiding out during the daylight, whatever. And no doubt that that's how a lot of slaves did escape. But in addition to the Underground Railroad, some escaping slaves could just take the Overground Railroad. And that's what Fred Bailey did. Keep in mind that they didn't exactly have picture IDs at that point, so all he needed to get by was paperwork from a free black man that was about his height. Anna Marie and a few friends helped him to obtain exactly that, and on September 3rd, 1838, he boarded a train in Baltimore that was bound for Philadelphia. Now, of course, just because he had false papers didn't mean he was in the clear, right? But obviously, even people whose papers weren't false weren't in the clear, but plenty of shit could go wrong for him. Like, honestly, all it would take was a white person being nominally suspicious of him.
Yeah, but when has a white person ever been suspicious of a black person, though? I mean, he'll be fine.
Right.
He's gonna
Yeah,
be
see,
fine.
so as
He's
long
gonna
as he
be-
doesn't like try to walk a dog or drive a car, go swimming,
Yeah.
he'll be fine.
Or exist.
He'll be fine.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, right. Or barbecue, or hold a phone, or sleep in his own bed. Yeah. So the freedom papers he had, though, were from a guy that looked nothing like him. So any close inspection would reveal his ruse. And even though Baltimore was the second largest city in America in 1828, that just meant it had a population of 80,000 people. Right. So it's a kind of small town. Like it wasn't out of question that somebody would just be on the train going like, "Hey, Fred, the hell are you doing going to Philadelphia?"
Fred, why are you making that throat cutting motion and waving your hand at me like that? Man, Frederick Douglass, you are a weird guy. Frederick Douglass. That's your name, Frederick Douglass.
Now, okay, so for the 2 years leading up to his final escape attempt, Douglass had been working in the city's shipyards, which left him in possession of, amongst other things, a pretty thorough knowledge of sailor lingo. So when he needed to adopt a false persona for his escape, he went with a sailor. Not only could he speak their language, but cities like Baltimore, where like every business is kind of dependent on seafarers, tended to show a bit of deference to sailors even when they were black. And of course, a black sailor has every reason in the world to be getting on a train and heading north. Now, of course, his disguise nearly fucked him when he ran into some really chatty sailors along the route, but ultimately, less than 24 hours after he boarded the train, he deboarded in the free North. Now, of course, just because he made it to the North didn't mean he'd made it to safety. There were plenty of slave catchers that made their living rounding up fugitive slaves and collecting their bounties. So he abandoned his mother's name at this point, along with his two middle names, and rechristened himself Frederick Douglass. Actually, he started off as Frederick Johnson, but then like an anti-slavery activist friend of his told him that pretty much every escaped slave took the name Johnson. So he was like John Smith at that point. So he decided to go with something else. So now he actually plucked Douglass from Sir Walter Scott's The Lady of the Lake, though he added an extra S because he thought it was more dignified to have ass at the end of his name. It was a different time. It was a different.
Yeah.
So he spent a few days in New York hiding out with an anti-slavery activist while he waited for Anna Marie to catch up with him. And when she did, the two were married.
Yeah, the only bride ever to walk up the aisle while making sure she wasn't followed. Fun fact.
Now, to be honest, I'm doing a great disservice to Douglass by focusing so much of the story on his time as a slave and his escape, right? Like, we're more than halfway through the episode, and we really haven't gotten to any of the historically important shit that he did. But all the important shit is so heavily rooted in his origin story that you can't really get to the one without going through the other. Suffice to say, I'm going to be in a bit of a hurry through the rest of the essay.
Noah, last week Heath dedicated an episode of our podcast to a book he doesn't like but hasn't read. I think pacing's out the window. I think you're good.
All right, so at first, Frederick and Anna settled in New Bedford, Massachusetts, which was a bit more welcoming to escaped slaves than most New England cities. Douglass became a licensed preacher. Apparently, they had licenses back then, and that was in 1839, and he became a regular at all the nearby abolitionist meetings. It was through the latter that he became friends with famed abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison. Now, Garrison was America's most prominent anti-slavery activist, and his abolitionist newspaper, The Liberator, was the most widely distributed in the country at the time. And of course, when he met Douglass, he was like, dude, you really need to travel around telling your story at anti-slavery meetings. So he took on a new career.
okay, I'll travel, but I got to approve the itinerary. This is going to be a northern states tour. Exclusively northern states.
The second he says yes, some white person starts misquoting him to make themselves feel better. Frederick Douglass once said, how? I'm in the other room.
So in 1843, he joins Garrison and some other prominent abolitionists, and he set out on a tour of 100 meeting halls in the eastern and midwestern states in 6 months. Douglass was frequently accosted, beaten, and at one point permanently injured by angry white mobs during the tour, but he never missed an engagement.
A Scottish guy once angrily walked out of a meet and greet I was doing, and I considered never showing my face in public again.
See, I was more embarrassed by the people who stayed. See, so that's between you and me. I felt bad for
I'm just
him.
glad I could cry on your shoulder that night, Eli. That's all.
That's nice. All right, so it was around this time that he started writing his first autobiography as well. Published in 1845, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, was an immediate bestseller. It was reprinted 9 times in just the first 3 years. It was translated into French and Dutch for publication in Europe. And keep in mind that like the American Revolution was damn near in living memory for some folks in England. So any story of how terrible Americans were as a people was bound to sell real well there. That made Frederick Douglass an overnight celebrity in the UK.
I get it. Not to brag, but we have multiple British listeners on this podcast.
We're like Frederick Douglass in a lot of ways.
Which tracks
really,
because we're solid proof of how terrible Americans are.
Yeah.
So it's just...
Oh, actually, yeah.
That's why they keep inviting us places.
So his fame in Europe pretty quickly led to a European speaking tour. Now, that was partly because anti-slavery groups in Ireland and Great Britain were sending a steady stream of invites, but it was also a safety issue. Right, by publishing his autobiography, the escaped slave, who was, by the laws of the country that he lived in, still Thomas Auld's property, was calling a lot of attention to himself, and there had been rumors that Auld might try to reclaim him. So he headed to England on an extended tour, and lest we fall into the trap of forgetting just how much more racist America was in the early 1800s, I want to offer a quote from Douglass where he was writing about it like his first few days in Ireland. Quote, I breathe, and lo, the chattel becomes a man. I gaze around in vain for who will question my equal humanity, claim me as his slave, or offer me an insult. I employ a cab. I am seated beside white people. I reach the hotel. I enter the same door. I am shown the same parlor. I dine at the same table, and no one is offended. I find myself regarded and treated at every turn with the kindness and deference paid to white people. Now, ultimately, Douglass would spend 2 years touring around England and lecturing to packed halls. During this time, his friends and a white lady he was almost certainly fucking during that period raised the money to buy his freedom. So in 1847, he returned to America an officially free man.
He goes back and he pays it all in pennies.
Fuck yeah.
And I'm going to need a receipt, goddammit.
Definitely needed a receipt. So now, once he was back in the States, he started his own abolitionist newspaper called the North Star. In the intervening time, he and Garrison had a bit of an ideological falling out, as Garrison was a little more wedded to the concept of nonviolence than Douglass. And let's be super clear about this one. One of the main reasons we don't hear as much about Frederick Douglass in history class as we do, say, Martin Luther King Jr., is because Frederick Douglass very clearly advocated for breaking some fucking skulls if that's what it was going to take to earn black freedom. Now, of course, breaking some skulls is exactly what it was going to take to earn black freedom. On April 12th of 1861, Confederate troops fire on Fort Sumter, and the American Civil War is underway. By that time, Douglass is 44 years old, and he's the most famous African-American in the country and probably in the world. He's been a tireless and vocal advocate for the abolition of slavery and for women's rights for decades by then. And as the war ramps up, he transitions quite nicely from reformer to war propagandist. He starts dutifully publishing articles about how, and this is real, he publishes articles about how Confederate troops are drinking from the skulls of their vanquished enemies and shit.
Well, maybe he just guessed that every other piece of writing in history ever, including the thriving reenactment scene, would act like the South were just good old boys out for a jog for the rest of history ever.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Balancing it out a bit. Now, it's worth emphasizing here that the Civil War, at least at first, it didn't have to be a war to end slavery. It's not like they said, we're going to end slavery, and then everybody went to war. Right? There was a very real fear among abolitionists that ultimately Lincoln would make peace by agreeing to allow the institution of slavery to continue as long as the South agreed to rejoin the Union.
Okay, but what kind of fucking deal would that be? Like, All right, fine, I'll take you back. And you don't have to stop fucking our gardener, but I get to order nachos. Hey, no nachos. No nachos either. Fuck, fine, you're right. Stupid. I don't get nachos.
Yeah, but Tom, we all know that guy. We all have that breath.
We do.
Right? And while people have debated the sincerity of the claims for over a century now, Lincoln said publicly that he would do exactly that. It took the work of people like Frederick Douglass to ensure that that was off the table, and his effort to that effect included face-to-face meetings with the president about it.
It's just like, Mr. Lincoln, I'm going to need you not to slide me across the table like a piece of paper with a dollar amount on it, okay, bud? No, I just sit in the chair. Thank you.
So,
good joke.
So once the Civil War was over and slavery was abolished, Douglass would turn his efforts and oratory to the fight for black suffrage and civil rights. He also took on a series of government jobs as the U.S. Marshal for D.C., the Recorder of Deeds for D.C., and Minister Resident and Consul General to Haiti. He would serve under 5 different presidents and break so many color barriers that it would be damn near impossible to list all of them. He died in 1895 at the age of 77 or possibly 76 from a massive heart attack. And if you want to know how active he stayed in his later life, the most recent speech he'd given before his death was that evening.
God damn.
Wow. And if you had to summarize what you learned in one sentence, what would it be?
No matter how bad you think American history is going in, it's always going to be worse.
Yeah. Yep. Are you ready for the quiz?
Oh, yeah.
All right, Noah. Tough one. If Frederick Douglass could see us now, he'd A, crack a few more fucking skulls.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it. That's what he would
it's
do.
A. You don't need
that's what he
to
would do. I think that's what he would
gotta
do.
Be A. Yeah.
Got it. One shot.
All right, Noah. If Frederick were alive today, he wouldn't have gone on tour, obviously. He would have started a podcast. What would the title of that podcast be?
Oh, no.
A, Escape.
Fantastic.
That's so good.
B, The Bailey. C,
Mhm.
Pod Slave America.
Oh,
or D,
Oh.
Wait, Don't Sell Me.
Oh, shit.
Wait, don't sell me is the greatest thing you've ever
That's
written.
that's fucking amazing.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm going to have to obviously go with D. Wait, don't sell me.
You are correct, and you get to answer the message when I get it next week from the analyst.
Yeah. All right, Noah. Thanks to my upstate New York education, who did I think Frederick Douglass was for most of my life?
Oh, Jesus
God.
Christ.
A, that guy who's always pretending to have a heart attack on that sitcom.
Jesus Christ.
Oh, Jesus
dude.
Christ.
Oh, no.
B,
Jesus Christ.
a boulevard in Upper Manhattan. C, the peanut butter guy.
Hey, man.
Or D, without context, the guy who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
All right, well, Eli, I know you pretty well. I'm going to go with D, the guy who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the
That
Galaxy.
is correct.
You know, as good as some of these were and not as good as some of these were, I think we're just going to have to say Heath is the winner because he skipped this and he will not have to weather any of the bad emails that we get.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Heath is
okay.
going to be the winner, and I guarantee that Heath is going to choose Tom. I just guarantee it.
Yeah, I feel
That's
that in
because
my
it's
heart.
what's in the
I know
essay
it.
schedule. That's
Just
why you
hold on, let me
said
talk
it.
to him real quick. Yeah, it's Tom.
Damn it.
I'm
All right.
channeling. Is Heath with us right now?
It was- All right. Well, for Eli, Tom, and Noah, I'm Cecil. Thank you for hanging out with us today. We'll be back next week, and by then, Tom will be an expert on something else. Between now and then, you can listen to all of our other stuff. All you have to do is citationpod.com, and you can check out all the links there. If you'd like to help keep this show going, you can make a per episode donation at patreon.com/citationpod, or leave us a 5-star review everywhere you can. If you'd like to get in touch with us, check out past episodes, connect with us on social media, or check the show notes. Be sure to check out citationpod.com.
Frederick,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I sent you in for $8 worth of groceries, but gave you a $10 bill.
Yeah, no, I changed it for 2 5s and I only needed the one.
Right. So the 5 is...
I spent it on the groceries.
Got it. All right, well then, here's the other 5.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, I guess I did the math wrong. Yeah.
Damn right you did. I am smart.
Yeah, you sure are.
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely. And parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/getstarted. That's GREENLIGHT.com/getstarted.